Business specialist here at the Champaign Public Library. I want to thank you all for attending today's workshop, Building Endowments 201. And I also wanted to mention, if you're interested in starting or growing a business or nonprofit, the library has a variety of great resources to help you, including doing market research, building a business plan, and a really great resource. You can research available grant opportunities. That's a great thing for nonprofits here locally. But anything you need, we're happy to assist. So without further ado, I wanted to welcome Genevieve Kirk. She is the director of the community center, the director for the Community Foundation of East Central Illinois. And I want you to join me in welcoming Genevieve.
Thank you, Lauren, and thanks for everyone for coming out to our Building Endowments 201 session. Can you raise your hand if you attended the first part of this session? Okay, great. So many folks who were here last time, you heard last time that the reason why we're offering this is we did a nonprofit needs assessment last year, and fundraising, specifically building endowments and running capital campaigns, were the two top needs that you, our nonprofit partners, expressed. So we're really excited to be able to offer this. If you happen to miss the first session, I will send out a link to the recording from our 101 session that was also presented by Shari Fox of Fox Philanthropic Advisors. This work is all part of our Center for Nonprofit Excellence, which is part of the Community Foundation of East Central Illinois. We are pleased to support the long-term interests of our partners in East Central Illinois and the benefit of folks living here. And with that, I would like to turn over the program to Shari Fox. Allow me to just introduce her to you for those who were not here the first time. Shari Fox is the principal of Fox Philanthropic Advisors, which she founded on the heels of a 28-year career leading planned, major, and principal gift programs at large public research universities and local non-for-profit organizations. Most recently, she served as Senior Vice President for Principal Gifts with the University of Illinois Foundation. In addition to her professional education and experience, she holds the Chartered Advisor in Philanthropy designation from the American College of Financial Services. As an independent philanthropic advisor, Shari helps individuals and families approach charitable giving strategically, intentionally, and effectively. Please join me in welcoming Shari.
Well, this is a huge room. Hello, everyone. I think the last time I was in this room maybe was for a candidate forum before the 22 election, maybe. I think so. So it's been a while not since I've been at the library, but since I've been here in Robeson AB. So I'm glad so many of you who were here for Endowment Building 101 came back. That's a good boost for my confidence, so I appreciate that and hope that means that you found it worthwhile. I was brave enough to watch the recording of the first session. Took me a while to do that, but one of the things I learned that I will try to be good at this time for this recording is to repeat your questions, because I realized we don't have a microphone for you unless I bring this around, which I could do. So anyway, remember last time we focused on some basic definitions and what the building blocks are for endowment and talked about endowment readiness. Today, we're going to discuss related policies for endowment and how to raise endowment funds for your organizations. So if you're ready, let's go ahead and dive in. So here are at least my objectives for today for you. The first is to understand the elements of endowment investment policy and to understand considerations for a prudent endowment spending policy. Those are two of the key policies to have in place if you're going to build endowment for your organization. Third is to understand the role of a gift acceptance policy, which many of you may already have a gift acceptance policy, even if you don't have an endowment fund yet. Because that's important to have in place if you're accepting private contributions. And then to help you at least be prepared to raise money for endowment and to be able to sustain momentum, okay? Is there anything else that you would like to try to cover today or have a better handle on before you leave in an hour? No, I picked the right list? Okay, good. Well, then we will get started. So first of all, let's talk a little bit about policies. So there are 3 policies that you should have in place. Talked about them just a second ago in the objectives if you're going to raise funds for endowment. First is your investment policy. The investment policy provides the parameters for your investment managers to manage the assets in the endowment. Okay? And we'll talk a little bit about what's in a good investment policy and the elements of that you should consider. The spending policy, as the name would imply, provides guidance and instructions on how money is dispersed from that endowment fund. Because remember, we talked about last time, endowments are forever, just like De Beers diamonds, right? An endowment lasts in perpetuity. So your spending policy addresses how you determine how much and when funds can be dispersed from that endowment fund to your operations. So it's a pretty important policy. And then lastly is the gift acceptance policy, which provides guidance about what you can accept as contributions for your organization, maybe specifically for endowment. That could be addressed in there as well if there's some difference. But, you know, we all take cash, right? But what else? What will you accept and under what circumstances? So we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. And again, a gift acceptance policy, I would argue, is important whether you are raising money for endowment or not. If you're raising private donations, having at least a basic gift acceptance policy is good practice. So one of the things that I want to say at the outset about this is that this is another place that the Community Foundation of East Central Illinois can be a great partner to your organization. They have sample investment and spending policies for you. They can administer and manage the investments for your endowment funds. They can hold those funds for you and manage the investments and work with you on what those policies will be and disperse funds to you. And Genevieve, did I miss anything? Is there anything you'd want to add to that? That's good, okay. So it's something to keep in mind, particularly for if you want to start building endowment for your organizations, but you're concerned about having the staff resources or the expertise and the sophistication to manage that, okay? So let's talk a little bit about the investment policy. And yes, it is more than buy low, sell high. Or as my husband said, we tended to do at one period there, buy high, sell low. So the first and one of the most important things that the investment policy addresses is what is that asset allocation? Okay, so how much can be in stocks, how much can be in bonds, fixed income kind of investments, and can any of it be in some of the other fancier things? Real estate, hedge funds, venture capital. Those typically are more prevalent for larger endowment funds. Okay, and one of the things, I failed to mention this at the beginning, and I apologize, but Genevieve is going to send out copies of these slides following the session. So don't feel that you have to write down every word, or I saw a pen go down, or snap photos. I mean, you can if you want, of course, but just know that you will get copies of these. Another good practice is to, rather than saying, you know, we're going to do 60% in stocks, 30% in bonds, 10% in cash, is to have a range of percentages. Because it's very hard to stay on one percentage, right, as values go up and down. And it also provides your investment manager with some latitude during special circumstances. You may want to claim a target, like, you know, stocks can be 40% to 70% with a target allocation of 60%. That I see that quite often. But best practice is a range. And then Again, something that you may not need to worry about at the beginning, but as your endowment grows, is thinking about subclasses, such as within stocks. How much do you want in large cap stocks, mid cap stocks, or giant companies, mid-sized companies, etc. And again, it's not, you don't necessarily have to have that in the early stages, especially when your endowment is just building, if you don't have endowment funds yet. But as it grows larger, then you may want to talk with your investment advisor about what they would recommend for you to consider in those classes. An investment policy can also address what assets are allowed to be held within that fund. It may be, that you do not want venture capital assets in the fund or real estate held in the fund for some reason. It may also be that you have particular social restrictions that you want addressed, or certain stocks you don't want. For instance, 100 years ago, when I worked for a specialized department within a trust division of a bank where we had nonprofit clients, one of our clients was a regional division of the American Lung Association. Well, guess what? No tobacco stocks in their account, right? So if you have particular, environmental or governance guidelines that you want, again, good to discuss those with your investment advisor, but that's where that would also talk about allowable assets. The investment policy should also say who has authority over that policy. Now, typically, as a policy of the organization, your board approves this policy and any changes to that policy. But it may be that it first rests with a finance committee or an investment committee, and that committee may also have authority to approve temporary exceptions or something. So the policy should state who has authority over the investment policy. And it's a good practice for the policy to state how often it is reviewed. Having served on boards and worked for organizations that had boards, if it's not stated, what tends to happen is something happens. It's a rough financial environment, and there's a question, and you look at your policy, and it's from 2008 was the last time it was reviewed. Doesn't mean you're going to make changes every time. Doesn't mean it needs to be annually, but I would say 3 years probably on the outside would be my recommendation. Okay. Are there any other questions about investment policy? Yes, ma'am. Sure. Well, that would be for your board to determine, but I would say you wouldn't want it to be longer than every 3 years for a review. You're welcome. Yes, sir. I hope so. That's a great question. So to repeat the question, if you have an investment professional as your advisor actually managing the assets, right, choosing the investments, why would you dictate an asset allocation? Well, because first of all, if you in this case, the board of directors or board of trustees of the organization, it's your money. And it provides guidance for that investment advisor. Just like if it's my money and I'm talking with my investment advisor, we're going to have a conversation about what are my goals for that, right? What's my risk tolerance? Am I willing to shoot for the stars and, fall on my face? So all of those kinds of conversations, and to say, based on the fact that this is a long-term investment strategy, and and our goals, which we're going to talk about for a moment, which is why there's typically the asset, at least the asset allocations between stocks, bonds, and cash, we can talk about that, fall in certain areas typically for endowment. But you want to provide them guidance. It also, most investment advisors want that. Now they want it to be a partnership where they'll talk with you and provide some advice about that. I'm being brought in as a consultant with a wealth manager currently, where we recently had that conversation about investment policy, but even more so spending policy with a not-for-profit client to provide advice on that. But it's ultimately their decision, and their board needs to approve that policy. I don't know if that really answers your question, but it's really to it also helps the advisor know what their lane is, or what the guardrails are for them. Yes, sir. Sure. Well, the difference is that's a good question. So the question was, for individuals, typically we have sort of one asset allocation when we're young professionals, and we have another one when we're middle-aged, and then when we're nearing or at retirement, we sort of change that. And is there a similar life cycle for an endowment? The difference is our lives, as much as we may wish otherwise, are finite. An endowment, again, goes in perpetuity. So typically those ranges stay pretty much the same, because you're always investing for the long term. So just like when I was 30, I was thinking very long term. I'm now a little more than 30, and I'm thinking more in a more finite, maybe less, certainly a shorter time horizon, but also maybe a little less risk for longer term reward. Okay, all right, so we're going to move forward a little bit. This may help with some of the questions, and but please keep asking them as you have them. So again, these are what are some important considerations for that endowment policy, or the investment policy. Again, it's the longest possible time horizon. Perpetuity, very long time. I don't know anything longer than that. These, I would argue, should be your goals for investing the endowment. One, you want growth over time. So growth in that fund over time. Some of that to come from additional donations, right? But you also want, over a lot of market cycles, unfortunately we do have down years, but you want growth in that principal over time. Very importantly, and this is where your investment policy meets your spending policy, you want to maintain purchasing power, right? So, just in the past year, right? $1,000 doesn't buy today what it bought last year. Well, $1,000 this year certainly doesn't buy what it bought in 1980. So you want to manage it in a way that you are maintaining the purchasing power for that amount you're spending. And you want to preserve capital to some extent, right? Doesn't mean you want to all be in, U.S. treasuries, but you want to certainly preserve the gifts that were given to you and not shoot for huge market returns that risk capital to a great extent. So I think of those as your primary goals, possibly even in priority order, although I don't know, the first two are 1 and 1A, and then the next one's 3 or 2. And then the other one I would say is keeping a level head, and when I say collectively, I mean as a staff and board across economic and market cycles. Because I will tell you, and I saw this particularly when I worked for that bank 100 years ago, and we were in some great return years. You know, markets were just doing really well. And people would want to, and so if you, let's say that an organization had a target of 60% in stocks, okay? And we do our annual investment review with them, and because their stocks did so well, now they were at 70% stocks, let's say. If you're going to stick to an asset allocation, that means you're going to actually sell some of those stocks and invest in bonds, which may not currently be showing the same level of return. So it takes some discipline to do that. But if your asset allocation is right for the long term, that's really the right thing to do. So, and all investments have some risk, right? So it's just sort of remembering it's a long time horizon and kind of keeping a level head, asking good questions, having good relationships with your investment advisors and evaluating them to make sure that they are doing a good job for you, and that, you know, communication, relative returns, etc. And we can talk more about that later if there's time, but that's why I have that keeping a level head, is really sticking to that discipline into your policies over time. Okay. Yes, oh, yes. You make sure it's being managed well so that as the market recovers, it will go back up. So part of that depends on your spending policy as well. If there are concerns, you could, there's nothing that you are required to do. What may be prudent, depending on why that happened, what the rest of the situation is that year, you could choose to reduce or eliminate your spending from the endowment that year and reinvest, so that you're not reducing it further. The question was, I'm sorry, I didn't repeat the question, broke my own rule, was if, and I'm going to interpret, so the question was, is if your endowment market value drops below the total of all the donated money, the original donated money, what do you do? And that could, for instance, that could happen when your endowment, particularly when your endowment's new, right? So let's say you get your first, I hope this isn't predicting anything. It's not predicting anything. And I have no power over the universe, so don't blame me if this happens. But if you got your first, 5 endowment gifts in 2024, and and returns for 2024, we were experiencing a negative market, and poof, by the end of the year, it's worth less than what they gave you. That's when that's the greatest risk. And so then you might look at, do you delay taking your first disbursement from the endowment? But that's a decision for your board to make. Does that answer that question? You start thinking about just prudent financial management. As long as you're, as long as you're not doing anything crazy, you didn't spend the money, so you kept your promise and your obligation to the donors who said you are retaining this and you're going to invest it according to your investment policy and you're going to spend it according to your spending policy, then you didn't do anything wrong. You were just not very lucky. So you could still spend according to your spending policy. You may choose not to. Yes, sir. Okay, so the question is if there is a particular reason that a member of the board or a member of the investment committee wants to change the policy because of outperformance of an asset class this year, does that need to be a board action or just an investment committee action, or is that up to the investment manager? Am I restating your question well? Again, what is up to your investment manager depends on how restrictive your investment policy is. If what you want your investment manager to do in that circumstance goes outside that policy, she can't do that without direction from your organization. And so typically an exception requires approval by the board. The other thing, and I am not an I don't have a CFP or a CFA. I'm not an investment expert. Matt, maybe I should be asking you to chime in here, which you're welcome to do. But the important thing, longest possible time horizon. My general advice is to not make changes just because something's in favor this year, because it may be out of favor next year. So that is just not a good practice. That's why you have an investment policy with an asset allocation that you stick to, unless there are multiple circumstances that make you have to review that. Yes, Becca. Yeah, so thank you, Becca. So that's an example of, what Becca was describing was an investment committee that reports to the board that has some non-board members on that committee. And a lot of organizations do that so that they can, for investment committees and other committees, to bring in expertise that's needed in those discussions. And it sounds like in that case, the board has given the investment committee authority to make changes to the policy. So that's, yes. And then I'm going to move on to spending policy because we're going to run out of time, and I will hang around and do my best to answer questions. But yes. Okay, well, and that's she was advised by their accountant, their CPA on the board, or the CPA that does your audit, okay, external CPA, that if their endowment falls below the original corpus, the donated amount, that they're going to have to make that up. And you mentioned GAAP, which are accounting principles, and that may also be the case in terms of how it's accounted for and shows up on the audit. So that's not my area of expertise, but that's a good point. I certainly would rely on your legal advisors and your accountants on that. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to move on from here, but like I said, I'll stick around to ask some questions. Okay. let's talk about the spending policy. And when I say not a budget plug number, the reason I say that is I have seen where the spending policy is whatever we need to balance our budget this year. Not great practice for true endowment because you're not going to be able to manage it for the long term, right? So your spending policy is driven by those goals for the endowment we talked about earlier, right? Growth over time, maintaining purchasing power, preservation of principal. You have to keep to those donor restrictions. So, good, and we talked about this a little last time, and we'll talk about this later too. There will be a session coming up next year on gift agreements, but good gift agreements when you accept an endowment says that it will be managed according and distributions made according to the policies of the organization. But if there were any restrictions you accepted from the donor on how much can be spent from that, then you have to adhere to those. So that's something to keep in mind. Again, preserving the corpus, to your question earlier, or the original donated funds. Historically, spending policies used a very traditional accounting definition of income. So you may have heard, in the general sort of definition or thought about endowment is you can only spend income. Well, when you say that, income, this I do remember, has a very accounting definition, right? It is, typically on an investment account, it's dividends and interest. It can also be rents if there's commercial property or there's any kind of real estate in there and somebody's renting it. It's any kind of ordinary income. If you own a business, it's the income from your sales or your services. Fortunately, you may remember MIFA from last time, those of you who were brave enough to join the first time, which is the Uniform Prudent Management of Institutional Funds Act, allows for a total return approach. Because if you can only use income, you're going to invest for income, right? And for instance, stocks don't typically pay a lot in income. Dividend rates are usually fairly low. Right now, interest rates are fairly high, right? To the gentleman's point before, but so if you were just using income, you'd put everything in fixed income. So you can have a spending policy that takes a total return approach. So let's talk about some of those best practices. Most contemporary spending policies state that your organization can distribute a specific percentage of a moving average market value. And that moving average is typically calculated over at least a 3-year period. So typically they're like a 3 to 5 year period. I've seen some as long as a 7-year period. And we're going to look at not the 7-year period, but why a moving average market value is preferred to a percentage of the market value every year. Okay. So why would you want to use a moving average? Because it reduces fluctuation in how much you're getting for your operations every year, right? I mean, you look at market returns anymore. Now, if you hear the market moved 300 points today, it's like, yeah. I'm old enough to know that used to be a really rare thing. If the market moved 300 or 500 or 600 points, it was a big deal. Now the market fluctuates significantly, and we have big up years and big down years sometimes. Well, that creates spikes and valleys in your distributions, which makes it awfully hard to budget, right? And can negatively impact easy for me to say, the programs that is funding. So the longer that period over which you calculate the moving average, the smoother the distribution pattern. there was a university I worked for before I worked for the University of Illinois. Shortly before I arrived, the board had changed the investment policy to be, I think it was 4%. It was either 4 or 4.5%. I don't remember anymore. But from a 3-year moving average market value to a 7-year. And this was the market returns that year were phenomenal. I don't remember what, but the deans of the colleges were not happy. Man, they were not happy, because that meant under the new policy next year they were going to get less money than they got the year before. The next year was 2008. And suddenly the deans thought that the chief investment officer at that university was the most brilliant man on earth, because their distributions went up, not down. So let's look, the percentage rate typically in that 3 to 5% range, which can sound low, especially in times when, interest rates are higher now. But again, preserving the purchasing power over time means you're allowing for some growth by taking out less. So typically we see those percentages in the 3 to 5% range. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So again, good question. 3 to 5% of what? Of a moving average market value. So see at the very beginning, distribute a stated percent of a moving average market value. So that if it's 3%, it's applied to so let's say it's a moving 3-year average market value, and you're calculating the return for next year, for 2024. Again, your policy would say moving 3-year average market value determined on December 31st or determined on September 30th. So you would look at the last 3 years ending market value on that date, average them, and apply 3% to that number. And then next year you would drop the first years and then take the next 3. Right. All that together makes the market value. Yep. So you should, just like when you get your retirement fund statement, you know how it shows, usually will show book value and market value. That you're looking at that market value. The market value takes into account any earnings and growth that are still in that fund. Yep. Good question. So let's just look at an example, maybe. Why am I stuck? Hang on. Let's try this again. Oh, I know why I'm stuck. There we go. Pay attention to the blinking cursor, Shari. Okay, so let's look at this example. So let's say we have an endowment fund, just to make the math simple, worth $100,000 on December 31st, 2017. Let's just assume that this fund earned the equivalent of the S&P 500 returns every year for the next 5 years. And the spending policy is 4% of the market value on December 31st of the preceding year. So not a moving average, okay? Just 4% of the previous year-end market value. And so the distribution I show would be the following year. So if it returned, this shows in every year following that 2017 what the market return was. Okay, so can you see that? In 2018, it was negative 6.24%. The next 3 years, it was nicely positive, close to 29%, then 16.25%, then close to 27%. And then in 2022, remember this? Negative 19, almost 0.5%. So this shows what the distributions from that endowment fund would be every year. So what happens, it goes up. First of all, it probably went down from the year before, we're sure, for 2019. And then each year it goes up until that negative year, and then the distribution drops. So now that organization, I'm looking at Jaya, so let's say it was races, almost $2,000 less in income. A little hard to budget for. Let's look at an example with a moving average market value. So the same fund, still 4% distribution, but using a 3-year moving average market value. And just for simplicity's sake, let's assume 2016 year-end market value was 100,000, just like 2017. So I could do the math easily without thinking too hard. Okay, so again, that year-end basis is if we were just doing it as of December 31st value. But if you use a 3-year moving average market value and apply that 4%, what do you notice? Couple things. One is there are several years where the actual distribution is lower than it would be if you just used that year end, because those 3 years had really good returns, right? But it goes up a little every year, including that year that it dropped. Now, this example works that way. I'm not saying there might not be years that the distribution would drop, but it would drop by much less of a degree than if you were just using year-end market value. So that's why the best practice is a moving average market value as the basis to which you apply your percentage spending rate. Makes sense? Are you tracking? Okay. So again, it helps you with budgeting, it helps you with consistency, and it helps preserve the value and the purchasing power over time of that endowment fund. And it allows for a total return investment. Okay, questions? Confused? Suddenly everybody got really quiet. It's math and there's numbers and stuff. Okay. All right, so we're ready to talk about gift acceptance policies? Yes, sir. I don't believe so. Now, there may be a reason that in your early, and this is again, because, and I'm sorry, I'm not sure, when you were talking about the CPA recommending, you want to talk to your accountants. I would say as you're building a new endowment fund, if you can exercise the discipline to maybe let it stay invested for a few years, 3 years maybe, before you start distributing, that helps you prevent cutting into the original gifts, right? Because it allows you to start building some investment performance within there. But what MIFA said is that you are allowed to distribute distribute capital gains, not just income. So and I'm going to be honest, I would have to go back and make sure that cutting into original corpus would be allowed. That's where you might need to reduce, if that spending amount would cause you to cut into corpus, you would need to reduce what you're actually taking out that year, so you didn't do that. Corpus is, to your point, the original donated funds. Principal or market value is, well, principal is the original donated funds plus any capital appreciation. But it allows you to look at market value so that you're looking at income and growth over time. Yes, sir. So the question is if you can defer, since you can defer taking distributions from the endowment, does UPMIFA have any limitations on that? Not that I remember, but I certainly don't have the law memorized. MIFA is more about investment management, yeah, so about management and spending policy. But you could, there are, sometimes organizations will choose for a particular year to not distribute. But you also want to make sure you're communicating with your donors about why you're not doing that, because they gave that money to you to be used for that purpose. Doesn't mean that they're going to have a problem with that, especially if it's because the endowment fund is still building and you would be forced to cut into corpus. But it's where it's good to communicate with donors. Yes? Okay, so the question was, do I know of any organizations that rather than using a percentage spending policy each year take whatever is amount the fund has over and above the original corpus and use that? So do I know of any? And then the second part of the question is there an advantage or disadvantage either way? So the first answer is I don't know of any organizations that do that, but I would not be surprised that there are organizations that do that. If you really want this to be I don't think that's the best practice. The disadvantage is that's going to change every year. You're not allowing for those funds to grow. It's sort of like their donated money is almost sort of forgotten. It's like, okay, so that'll just sit there instead of it being a growing resource for your organization. Then it becomes, I don't know, like reserves you can't touch. It's not a great practice for the long-term strength and growth of your organization, in my opinion. I don't think there's, as far as I know, and again, not an attorney, don't play one on TV, I don't think there's anything illegal or unethical necessarily about that. I don't think it serves the organization very well. The world according to Shari, which, you know, whatever that's worth. Okay. All right, we're going to talk about gift acceptance policies a little bit because I'm going to run over and I don't want to run over again. All right. So here are some considerations for gift acceptance policies. I mean, first of all, your organizations should certainly always accept. Sure, you do accept cash. Anybody not accept cash? Who doesn't accept cash? Do all of you accept marketable securities? Do your donors know they can contribute marketable securities, stocks, mutual fund shares, and how to do that? You are just quick aside. And I'm going to forget. So wealthy, I think this was a study of people with at least $1.5 million in investable assets. And for many of us, that sounds like a lot of money. and I'm not saying it isn't, but there are a lot of people, and probably a lot of people among your donors, who, especially when they consider their retirement funds as well, they're in that category. What percentage of the average, what's percentage of wealth is held in cash? Take a guess. Oh, I heard 8 and 5. You guys are smart. 3. So if you want to raise money, especially in major gifts and gifts for endowment, you need to be able to accept things other than cash. Whole other, longer discussion than we have time for. But, so your policies, I would say, should state, of course, you accept gifts of cash and you accept gifts of marketable securities. So where there's an open market, right, there's an open, understandable exchange, they're very liquid, you can convert that money to cash, you can reinvest it in other things. It would also address, in your gift acceptance policy, contributions, assets you might accept. Will you accept real estate? Or is it under certain circumstances? Will you accept collectibles like art and antiques? Do you accept privately held business interests? Lately, do you accept cryptocurrency? There's a lot that goes into those discussions among your board and your finance committee and your CEO and CFO. If you are just getting started, you may say that these will be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. You might only accept assets that can be easily and quickly converted to cash, which may leave out closely held business interests, real estate, etc. And then the policy should also address who decides on either exceptions or when it's not explicit in the policy. So quite often it is the CFO has that authority, or the CEO, or a gift acceptance committee. And if that's quite often the case, which is a pretty good practice because it brings different expertise, and that may be your CEO, your CFO, maybe the development director, and a couple of key people from your board, or any combination there. So that committee may only come together when there's a question, okay? Or it can be some combination of this. So those are the kinds of considerations to think about for your gift acceptance policy. And as you decide what's in and what's out of what you will accept, these are some considerations. Liquidity, right? Can you convert this to cash to either use if it's not endowment, or can it go into the endowment and then be liquidated to invest according to your investment policy, right? Are there costs to accept or hold it? That's why marketable securities, little, very little, maybe some trading costs, but very little, no risk or cost hold. The liability of or risk of owning an asset. You know, if you own shares of a closely held business, do you have any responsibility for what happens in that business if somebody gets hurt or they don't have any cash flow or whatever? However, if you know there's somebody interested in buying those shares quickly, maybe you would accept those closely held business interests. Can you own that asset? Depending on what type of asset it is, what type of organization you are, can you own that? And who owns the asset? That's the other piece, is if Bob Smith wants to donate real estate, does Bob Smith own the real estate, or is there a trust that owns the real estate? And does he have the authority to donate it? Or is there a company that owns that real estate that he's part owner of? Does he have the authority to donate that? So this is where, again, get professional advice when you're uncertain. You want accounting advice and you want legal advice. Again, if this is a new concept for you, or you are developing your first gift acceptance policies, Community Foundation can help. And start simple. It may be that you state that, gifts of assets other than, might be a very simple one-page policy. Gifts of assets other than cash and marketable securities will be evaluated on a case-by-case basis, but then know how you're going to evaluate them. And it may be with outside expertise. Okay. All right. Sorry that we're running a little late. I tried to cover too much. So quickly, let's talk about raising money for endowment. So first of all, I think this is the fun part. This is where you get to work with donors, and you get to go back to those things we talked about last time about your case for support. You get to talk to them about why investing in the long-term financial stability and health and growth of your organization will make a difference. Few things that make this different than maybe the ways that some of your organizations have raised money in the past. It's not a direct mail or email solicitation. These are face-to-face conversations because you're asking people to make a special gift above and beyond what they give annually to your organization for a particular purpose. So you want to have a conversation with them. It requires some research before you go have that conversation, knowing about the donor and their history with your organization. Maybe knowing something about what their interests are and what their other community involvements are, because that may be something that you build upon related to what you're asking them to support at your organization. Do they have, are they a member of your board or a former member of your board, or they have key volunteer involvement serving on a committee, helping run a golf outing or a gala, being a hands-on volunteer for those of you who run organizations like the Eastern Illinois Food Bank, or I think of Crisis Nursery and other organizations where you have volunteers regularly. And if they're longtime volunteers, those are often good endowment gift prospects. And then to consider different ways they can make the gift. After, once they start to show interest, again, this is different than your usual writing a check and sending it in. They could make a one-time gift. Will you accept a pledge over a period of years? I hope you would say yes. And then what generally is your maximum? Is it 3 years, 5 years? Typically it's one of those. A planned gift. Remember how we talked about last time? Not all planned gifts or gifts from someone's estate are for endowment, but many of them are. And quite often, that is when someone will make either their only gift or their largest gift to your endowment. So being able to talk about that as an option also, or it could be some combination of that, right? You know what, I can do X amount over 3 years, and then I'm going to put a provision in my will for a certain percentage of my estate to add to that. What a great gift that would be, right? You know this, right? The donor cultivation cycle. This should look familiar. So one of the things to know is that this cycle is shorter in duration for annual gifts, right? Once you're past the identification step. It's usually a fairly quick cycle to engage with them, make the ask, and then you're going to do over the course of the next 12 months, stewardship, whatever recognition they get, and then you're going to ask them to renew that gift or hopefully increase that gift. For any major gift, including gifts to endowment, it's a little bit longer time cycle, usually about 12 to 24 months from that first engagement to the actual gift. And renewal may or may not happen. But if it does, it's not typically annually, right? They see how their endowment gift is making a difference, or they've committed to something in their estate, and you are stewarding that relationship, and maybe 3 years later, you have a conversation about, again, thanking them for that and talking about, has anything changed? Would you, or, might you be able to make some of that gift now during your lifetime? if you've continued to engage them in the organization, then they're even more in, right? So they may volunteer that information. So, yes, ma'am. Maybe, yeah, well, we're actually a little over, so why don't we talk about that? Are you talking about how to steward that relationship and continue to have a conversation with the donor? Okay. So we're not going to go into that in detail, but yes, you should, when you say report, you should certainly make sure that they are getting information on what's happened in your organization that year and how the endowment has made a difference. If they're contributing to a general endowment and don't have their own fund, where they have a separate named fund within that endowment, then you need to report to them about specifically that fund. But if they're all giving to one general endowment, then how was that endowment used? How did that help make a difference this year? Yes. Yeah. All right. So, and I apologize for going over. I know some people may need to leave. So one of the things, and this will be a slide to pay attention to when you get this, but this particular chart was developed by a colleague of mine named Craig Ruck, who does a lot of training in plan giving and is one of the giants in the field. And I've used it. I used it multiple times. But what I think is most important to pay attention to here is the donor source of funds and how that changes from annual giving programs to major gift programs to estate or planned giving programs. And again, endowment gifts are in that major gift and or planned giving columns. So this is not somebody giving from income. This is typically somebody giving from wealth. And wealth, we tend to think of wealth as like big numbers. Wealth is just what you own, right? What your assets are. So thinking about who your prospects are, that target audience. So think of these, when you're raising money for endowment, you're in that major gift column, as well as plan giving. But there's not a lot of differences there other than you're looking in major gifts. If it's an outright major gift, you're talking with somebody about how they might make that gift. Is it giving them opportunities? Is it one time? Is it over a period of years? And thinking about where that may come from. And if it's a planned gift, it's that same investment emotionally, but remembering that it won't come until some point in the future, and you want to maintain that relationship so that that gift not only stays in place but may continue to grow, and they may choose to front some of that money during their lifetime when they feel more confident doing that. And a lot of times as we get older and we feel a little bit more confident in that our finances are going to support our lifestyle and our needs, then we may start advancing some of those gifts. So, especially with rent that we're already over, what I want to say about this is your organization may not be ready to get bogged down in thinking about different kinds of planned gifts, but you should be able to or work towards being able to talk about gifts of non-cash assets, bequests, so donors making a provision for your organization in their will or trust, and naming your organization as a beneficiary of their IRA or other retirement plan accounts. Those are the most common planned gifts. They are the simplest. Bequests, retirement plan designations, totally revocable. Donors can change them if they need to or want to in the future. There are tax planning reasons that naming charity as the beneficiary of an IRA or retirement plan is often, very often, a good choice for charitably minded individuals, because those assets are going to be taxed when they pass to anybody else. They're going to be subject to income tax. So we can talk more about that. If anybody wants to, we can either, my card's in the back, or we can talk more about it later. And we'll talk about, there's going to be a session on planned giving in 2024, where we can get into that in a little more detail. So again, same, look familiar? Partnering with the community foundation is often a good way to get started, because they can help you through these practices. They can manage the funds for you, disperse the funds for you, do the accounting for you. So I encourage you to talk with Genevieve if you're just getting started with endowment. They can be good help. Even in some of the advice and policy, like I said, they have sample policies, right, Genevieve, that can help get you started. Okay, you're going to get these slides. I was hoping we'd have time to do this today, and I apologize that we didn't. But I really hope when you get the copies of these slides, which will be probably today or tomorrow, right, Genevieve? Look at this one and take a little time to go back to last session's slides and these, and think about and jot down some notes. Where is your organization in endowment readiness? Just do it on a scale of 1 to 5. 5 is you're ready to rock and roll. You've got your case for support, and all your policies are in place, and your board and your senior leadership are all committed to building endowment. Awesome. 1 is you really want to start an endowment, or you want to build on the endowment you already have, but you don't really have anything in place yet. Most of you are somewhere between 1 and 5, I would bet. Maybe some of you are at 5, and that's fantastic. But if you're not at 5 yet, or even if you are, you're ready to go, what are the next 3 steps your organization is going to take, and over what time period? And I would say, considering it's November, let's say in 2024, what are 3 steps you can take to move yourself along that readiness scale? Okay, and like I said, or if you're at 5 already, great. What are the 3 steps you're going to take to start raising the money? Which is the fun part. It really is the fun part. All right, I'm going to hang around, so if you have additional questions, again, I apologize for going a little long. Thank you for sticking with me. These are some sessions that the Community Foundation has for the not-for-profit community and the Center for Nonprofit Excellence in 2024. Nonprofit Fundraising 101 on January 30th. Gift Agreements 101 on May 9th. September 18th, Introduction to Planned Giving, and October 17th, How to Run an Annual Campaign. You will be stuck with me for the first 3, but not the annual campaign. That's not my area of expertise, and I believe Charlotte Jolly, right, from Carl Foundation, she's fantastic, is going to do that session. So I hope I get to see several of you at those. I will stick around if you want to ask any additional questions, and I sincerely appreciate your time and sticking with me a little extra for all of this information. Thanks. Genevieve, anything that you need to add? Okay, great. Grab some Smarties on the way out, because you're all smart now.